in order to help us understand our anatomy, I have this parts of the skeleton. This is half of a pelvis, and this is the femur or thigh bone. So I'm going to hold this pelvis up to Karen's body, and we're going to see that this is where the hip socket is, okay? And the area that Karen pointed to is up here, and this is part of the pelvic bone, but is not where the joint is, okay? So if we were to look at this, here's the pubic arch, which is in the front, and the seat bone, which is underneath, and the back of the seat bone comes up and comes into the body of the pelvis and forms the hip socket. And then the top of the pelvis is here, right? So if we look at it and I hold this up from the side, this is a little larger pelvis than Karen's, we can see that here's the top of the pelvis, which is the waist area, or where the belt sits, okay? And the seat bone's the part in the saddle, the pubic arch is in the front, and then the hip socket on the side. So Karen pointed, again Karen, point where you, yep, to this bump here on the pelvis. And that's not where the joint is. So that's going to interfere with the function of this hip socket and ball. Okay, I'm going to grab the femur here. And if I put the femur in the socket, you can see that the ball and socket joint, that's the only hip joint we have. A lot of people call this area, the waist area, the hip. But really that's this part of the top of the pelvis. So we need to clarify the joint because that becomes very critical when we're riding. Okay? The ball and socket joint is a very movable joint. There's a lot of range of motion. Okay? It can go out, in, forward, back, because it's a ball. And so it glides around in the socket area. We have ligaments that limit the amount of movement, and that's a good thing when we talk about riding, because if it's too loose, it's really hard to stabilize in the saddle. So the ligament, there's one that comes from the center of the ball into the center of the socket, and then there's a ligament that restricts the movement of the femur going forward, and then another one that wraps around and restricts the movement going back, and that helps stabilize the ball and socket joint efficiently without requiring a lot of muscular effort.